They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
And off we go. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm Raph. Below me is Jim. That corner there is James. I'm getting this right. I'm just having to reverse these things. And then that guy I'll introduce in a second. But gentlemen, well, good to have you back and everybody on the same show. This is great.
Always excited to be on here. I can't wait for this topic.
I know. Now people are about to get really excited on this one.
Yeah,
I thought AI was going to solve everything with coding. We're about to find out if that's true or not.
James is like, where's the mute button on Jim? All right, our fun intros aside, our guest today, I'm going to let him introduce himself. He works at a place that I frequent. So I'm glad to have him on and hear him talk about the AppSec story. Paulo, introduce yourself. Give us a little sense of who you are and what you do.
Hey everyone, I'm Paulo Del Mundo, and I run the application security function at The Motley Fool. So The Motley Fool is interesting because it's a financial media services firm, but it also has an investment arm. And so we run like a tech company, but we also have to abide by rules and regulations, from an investment standpoint, investment advisor standpoint. It's a fairly small team. Whole company is mid-size, I would say about 800 employees total. Application security team, 2 people, right? So the challenge is how do we scale ourselves and not become the bottleneck for the entire organization.
But by the way,
I'm sorry, did he just say 2 people?
He said 2 people. Yeah, he did say 2. But I'm actually not super surprised, Jim, because like back 26 years ago, when we did this, when I was doing this at GE, like my entire AppSec team was.
I know, but I mean
35,000 and more apps than you could possibly.
How many developers though? Like how many people are actually working on code?
Around 100, anywhere from 100 to 150. Over the 6 years I've been here. So it's actually not that bad. Like 2 to 100, 150. Like that's actually good odds, as Raph was just saying.
Yeah. So can I ask? This is where my head's at, and Jim, I think you and I'll just probably be passengers on this one with James driving this one. But I do want to start off with the question, and that question is, what's the role of your team in in AppSec? Are you a gatekeeper? Are you an audit? Are you a governance arm? Like, what is it that you do, and how does AppSec function in and around you? Because 2 to 150 doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. And our philosophy is that we are not the gatekeeper. We are a consultant to software developers. And we will give our assessment of a security control or a risk. And we will, use compliance terms as well to color that. But at the end of the day, there is a reason for, there's a risk-reward ratio here, right? Certain things might be risky on the face of it, but if the reward's greater, then perhaps, then the conversation is like, okay, what can we do to make this more secure? But ultimately, right, we are consultants, risk consultants to our software developers.
So are they handling all of the triaging of scan results? Like, do they handle that all themselves, and then they just bring you in when they come across either a challenging question or, hey, we think this is a false positive, we just want to validate beforehand, like that sort of working mechanism?
Yeah, so we work hand in hand with them. They are responsible for ensuring that vulnerability backlog gets remediated. And but we can't be there handholding every single decision. As you might imagine, it just doesn't work. The ratio doesn't work. So yes, they whenever they have any exceptions to vulnerabilities, then we're brought in and we can talk about oh yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, it's that's exactly how it works.
Yeah, which is one of the only ways, I mean, to be able to handle it with a small, I mean, I have a small team too, right? Very similar. It's not, you can't be triaging it in the way of everything, because otherwise you're a bottleneck that stops everything moving forward. It's not going to work that well doing that. So trying to pick and choose. And I think to your question, Raph, we could have 50 AppSec people on. They'll give you, 25 different answers of what their function is in the organization. From bigger teams, like I come from a company where we had 26 people, all on doing like reviews and different things like that, versus going to teams with lower number where you don't get to do a code review of everything, right? You're not doing design reviews. You're limiting out to more of that kind of audit, guidance, consultant phase.
Paula, how many apps are there?
There's about 15 apps.
Okay. Do you sit in on, James brought up a good point, do you guys sit in on like architecture and design meetings and all the stuff like before the bad code is written?
It depends. So there is a risk prioritization exercise that we do whenever a new project is spin up. Right? We try to identify like, how risky really is this thing? What kind of data is it handling? Is it PII? Is it credit card holder data? Right? Is it public to the internet? And based on like these factors, right, then we bucket into essentially 3 buckets. And so, when it comes to like, are we in design reviews? Not necessarily all the time. If it's in the bucket 3 where, it's an internal application that only one person uses, then, it probably can, be something that we, keep tabs on, but not necessarily on a day-to-day basis. And your bucket 1s are the really important apps that, handle all these important, sensitive data. Yeah, we absolutely want to be in every design review and be looking at almost every pull request.
Do you set sort of standards as well at those different levels? So it's the standards on secure coding coming from your team, or do you review the standards that the various teams develop?
We set standards. So, part of the job is educating developers, right? Because not everybody has a security inclination or a security background. So, we use, what's commonly out there, like the OWASP, documentation or things from CSA. So it's mainly about, educating developers on what best practices look like.
Are they running code scanners, or is that left up to your team? It sounds like your team is operating more, like you said earlier, at the risk level and sort of governance. But on the technical side, most of it is happening within the teams, and you're confirming that they're doing it or recommending what tools for scanning, that kind of thing?
No, so we actually help them with the setup of these tools. The whole vulnerability remediation part is sort of hand in hand with them, but because we're experts in these tools, we essentially set them up when the project is spun up.
One more and I'll stop.
Oh, go.
I'm curious, have you established like ambassadorships in this clearly large team, right? So for example, this team works on these kind of applications or whatever. Have you identified like a primary point of contact that you can work with directly, like an ambassador? So as you roll things out, you have a representative, if you will, in that team, or multiple people, like a
security champion.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Exactly.
Yeah, security champions are a great strategy or tactic in security programs. I would say we're not there yet, and it's probably something that I want to reassess in the next year. We did try to have a security champions program, but it's a small team, and quite frankly, it was very difficult to whenever you spin up something like that, it does take some time and effort. And at that point in our life cycle, we just didn't have the time to dedicate to a dedicated security champions program. That being said, I informally, I know who is interested in what, right? We have people who are really interested in AI security. And so, whenever there's an AI security question for a particular team, then, I typically go to them, and I've involved them in, a lot of things that are in that space. So it's more of an informal thing, but, so that's something that we're going to have to reassess in the near future.
Hey, I'm curious, your team's background, are you guys security people? Are you former developers? Some combination of the two? What works? What have you put together?
Yeah, so I myself in my previous life, was a software developer. I did it for a decade plus, and I just sort of stumbled into security, and I found it interesting enough to dedicate the next decade of my life. So I really think that there's a huge advantage to having something outside of security. It doesn't have to be software development, but if you know what, your constituents, what their day-to-day life is, it's a huge advantage. Same thing goes for engineering, right? If you have a previous system engineer, and they know the day in, day out what's going on in those meetings, in those conversations, that's a huge leg up.
Yeah, I totally get that, right? Being able to speak the language, because AppSec 26 years ago was security people reviewing code, testing code, finding flaws, going back to developers and saying, you're dumb, you don't get it, fix this. Developers looking at security people and saying, I have no idea what this means. You don't know how to fix it. I don't know what it is. Moving on. Right. And that's kind of how we got to, we got along that way for about 10, 15 years. I'm glad to see that because James, you've been talking about that. You can't have just security people trying to do AppSec stuff, because it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I wonder if that changes with AI now coming into play, and even the developers aren't writing code anymore. AI is writing it all for them. So they don't know how to understand the code. We don't know how to understand the code. We're all good. Let's just let ChatGPT tell us what the code means. But yeah, I've been saying for a long time, we've seen that shift over the last 20 years from the kind of network security people being AppSec to more of the coming from a developer background, understanding how developers work, the code that they're working on, all those pieces, because it ultimately helps identify, I think, as Paolo, can say, going and looking at tools and all that stuff, what's going to fit in your system. If I don't understand how you work, it's hard to pick a tool that's going to fit in with what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think we've seen a huge swing there, still kind of swinging.
I don't think Claude can necessarily replace people at this point. I've used it extensively, and it really is like a junior engineer. And you have to have taste whenever you implement something, because it might do a lot of good things, but I'd find edge cases that don't work, or why did it do it that way? That's against best practice. So I don't think it's there yet where it can be completely autonomous.
Before we dive into the fun world of AI, I want to ask one more thing, and maybe it'll spark somebody else's imagination. But when you think about designing and from paper to practice, implementing a AppSec program, something that functionally works, where you're not disliked, you don't end up as a speed bump on the way to production, or the scapegoat when things go badly. What have you found that has worked, and then a couple of things that you've tried maybe that weren't so successful?
Yeah, well, let me start off with what isn't successful. I remember when I was a software developer many moons ago, we would get this like big PDF of vulnerabilities that are application found, thrown over the wall. It's up to you to determine how to fix it, right? And then you'd read this thing and like nothing made sense, right? As someone who didn't have a security background back then. So, and your manager is telling you like, hey, we need to develop features as well. So fix this 100-page vulnerability report and deliver right now, right? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sounds like he had it easy with the 100-page report.
Right. Yeah. As he was saying that, I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I feel very attacked right now. This was, I recall doing this and thinking, why? Of course, this is the way to do it. And years later, you're like, that was so dumb. I can't believe we did that, but we did. All right, so that doesn't work. What have you found? Like, what's the things that a couple of tips that you'd give that would say, okay, this is lessons that I've learned the hard way, or maybe just things that you figured out that others should know?
Sure. So there's this whole concept of paved roads, right? Have you heard of this?
No, James has.
So the idea of paved roads is, let's set the standard of what our applications will be built upon, right? Think about, cross-site scripting as a vulnerability, right? It's very easy to, choose a framework that unfortunately might, print, user-defined input into HTML, and you would get allow attackers to essentially take over the browser.
Canvas.
That sort of thing went away when we said, here are the standards that you have to use. Like, if we use React.js, right, they're very explicit about the function, like it shouldn't be used. Set dangerously inner HTML, like it explicitly says don't do it, right? And so if you have your developers use a certain framework, or if you take off the rough edges of their current frameworks that they're using, then that kind of vulnerability can't happen at all. Does that make sense? So you're trying to create an ecosystem of things that they can use, and that's why it's called paved roads.
Have you found that is how often do you get exception requests for that? Because when I tried that, again, many moons ago, we'd pick the framework, we'd pick the platform, we'd pick the language, and every other developer would be like, yeah, that won't work for me. I need to go use this special one. Or, yeah, I know you said that this is the allowed encryption function, but I'm going to write my own because I can do better. Like, how do you avoid that, the world of exception hell where everything's an exception then?
Well, luckily for us, it didn't turn out to be that way. I think the beauty of our process is that we thought about a lot of edge cases that developers might want. And there might be a few exceptions here and there, in which case, if it really is a bad idea, then we're going to say that, right? But if there's a reason for it, then you can track that easily. And it doesn't, and yes, we have a database of like, here's the exceptions that we have, but it's more of it's not the norm to require exceptions, but it's easily trackable at the end of the day.
Yeah, some of that helps when you can force the exception process to go higher up the chain. And, we want to use this encryption. Great. Then this level in the company is going to agree to that and sign their name and say, yeah, we're okay with this exception to use this. So that way, back to your other point, Raph, about, hey, let's reduce my liability here. I'm going to pass that on.
Yeah, that's a common trick in application security. Just getting the CTO to sign off something tends to get people to be more creative.
Like, listen, I'm not going to tell you can't use MD5 hashing. I'm just going to tell you the CTO has to sign off that says he's okay with it being MD5 hashing, right? Like, I give you the risk, you make the decision.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of how it is, right? I mean, a lot of times probably see this, right? Like AppSec is not like that gatekeeper of the person of no. It's the let's understand the risk. And once we hit a certain level, the acceptance of that risk has to go up here. We're not saying you can accept that, but at this lower level, you're the one actually accepting that. Have you guys done anything with like democratized vulnerability management or anything where you tier it out and you say, okay, up to like a medium, if we need an extension or we need a risk exception, like a engineering manager could kind of sign off. They can take responsibility for it. They know their app. If they say it's okay, we're good up to this point. But when you start getting above that, like highs, you need a director or a C-level, and then criticals, right? Like it's above. But at no point really is it security signing off and saying, hey, we're okay with this. Like it's your app, it's your code. You know, we've set these levels of what's acceptable and what's not, and to what point of who could accept that risk. But it might not necessarily be us. We're a two-person team. We can't look at everything. We can't accept all the risk that's there.
I love what you're saying, because that blends into my philosophy or our team's philosophy very well, which is that we're not here to tell you no. We're here to tell you what is risk. And yes, there might be absolutely, important reasons why you might say, yes, we'll accept this risk, but it shouldn't be the application security team to determine that at the end of the day.
Okay, I wanted to throw in there because something's been, as you guys are talking about, components and paved roads. What are your how much thought do you give to like the software supply chain, right? And open source components that are used. That this is something that like a lot of people have been bringing to the forefront. There's software software security companies that do this stuff now, dependency management, and they help you identify. Like there's software companies around that, and there's tons of tools around that. How do you think about the software supply chain effectively that your developers then build with?
Yeah, so I would say this is probably one of the biggest risks that we have. You can see in the news every week almost, some third party gets compromised, and every team is essentially on a remediation path for a couple of days, rotating their secrets and fixing the blast rages of these things. So I think of it as a couple of ways. So from a vulnerability management perspective, we are getting tons of vulnerabilities, right? We just use a lot of open source, just like a lot of companies. And it is impossible to fix everything. It's just, I wouldn't even know how to start, right? We're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of vulnerabilities. But we can limit that. We can filter that based on prioritization, right? This is where risk-based prioritization comes in. We have to know things like, is this application, public to the internet, right? Is this, vulnerable function actually reachable from the application itself? Because if it's not, then I would say, there is still risk, but it's probably okay, right? Yeah, one day somebody might call it, but I would say it's something that can be deprioritized versus something more pressing. And so, and we look at other standard factors like EPSS and, whether it's in the KEV. And using all this, we are able to limit these hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities to, a few that are truly important. And that's a much easier conversation when you have with developers. So that's one. It doesn't address malware that is introduced into these third parties, right? When a package is compromised and code is added to them, the industry doesn't really have a good answer to that currently. So we're forced to rely on adding, like a 7-day grace period. No new dependencies into your stack if it isn't at least 7 days old. And I think that's really useful, because then, within 7 days, if it hasn't been publicly, declared as compromised, then, it's probably okay. So these are some of the tricks that we use in our day-to-day, vulnerability management.
Do you incorporate that same type of grace period for updates to components that are already in the system? Because, I mean, there's typically kind of two areas that we see from the supply chain, right? You've got either just vulnerable components, which is this is what SCA really focuses on, like, oh, there's a vulnerability, you should fix it. But then you've got compromised packages, which, right, like somebody actually either took over the package, hacked into the package, they modified the code. And in those situations, a lot of times we're seeing people like, hey, put in your lock file and I'm going to stick to this version until I say we can move to the next version. So I love the, hey, you can't put a component in if it's less than 7 days old. So that way there's time to do that. But and we don't see this as often, but a package that has been a legit package compromised, are you holding back on like immediate upgrades to the latest version to allow a similar inspection, if you will, that, nobody's notified, like found this type of issue with the packages?
I just do it for everything, right? Because the compromised package can affect both existing and, previously added components. So we just have a blanket rule, no new packages for 7 days.
Because this RAF, I mean, this gets to the problem of third-party components, because everybody will tell you like, oh, you got a patch, but then at the same time they'll tell you, oh, well, you should be running N-1 because the latest version could be vulnerable.
Yeah,
but I got a patch, right? And then if you get too far behind, if you're on, version 1.0 of jQuery today, you can't just patch to the current version. Like, that's a complete rewrite of your app, right? Like, so there's this, it's a really complex balance to try to figure out, how do we stay at the version we should be at without going too far ahead, but not getting too far behind?
Yeah, I mean, which incident was it where they were able to, compromise multiple tags, not just like the current release? So I'm not sure if N-1 would work in this case. It seems like 7 days isn't that bad of a grace period. So I just don't know if if there needs to be any other things that we apply on that.
I think all these things are imperfect. You just find the one that works the best in your organization, that gives you some measurable amount of relief, and then you hope for the best. I mean, like, that's the thing about what we do, right? There's no guarantee that the fix you're applying, A, actually fixes the entire problem, or B, doesn't introduce a new flaw. Like, we've seen that a bajillion times in our industry. I mean, it just happens. And before we run out of time, I do want to ask you, like, what is your thought on you mentioned Cloud Code and all that, right? Like, what is your thought on writing code, finding flaws, fixing flaws in the age of in what we call the AI Vulnpocalypse, right? Like, just allegedly the new Cloud Mythos was like this revolutionary thing, and it was going to find tens of millions of vulnerabilities. Everybody's going to be behind. Everything is going to be exposed, and OMG, BBQ.
I know for a long time, people weren't sure if it was just marketing hype or this was the real thing. Now we're seeing, Project Glasswing members talking about their results and what they've observed, and it does seem like there's some ammunition to the claim, right? That it's a real thing, and we're able to find so many more vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So I do think that defenders are going to be forced to using AI to fight AI. Maybe not in the near future, but as these things happen more often, there's just no way that we can address everything, and we need to use AI to at least get rid of the things that are easy to remediate with AI. And then there might be a subset that people like me, humans, can focus on and use our judgment. But hopefully that will tamp down on all these problems.
I mean, that makes sense, right? I sort of wonder, the line is artificial intelligence is no match for human stupidity, and people laugh that off, and it's like, but really though, like, how many times in my career, and the time that I did AppSec was almost 8-9 years, did my team have this is a tested, packaged, ready to go method for doing database access or authentication. And we would find that the developer, in fact, did use that, but somehow in their infinite wisdom managed to implement it in a way that introduced another new vulnerability that we didn't think of. And it's like, we're getting to the point where I think even if software is development is well intentioned, the vulnerabilities are low, introduced are low. It's in the implementation. It's in the way we configure, the way we operate, the way we connect things together. And I still worry about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we've had static analysis tools for, many years already. And, what's surprising is with Mythos, it's finding these things that, our traditional tools haven't or couldn't. And not to mention, like, there's like business logic rule security issues that no tool can find. And so I'm kind of an optimist. I am excited. maybe I'm crazy. I'm excited to see what AI can do in this space, and the nirvana of being able to have secure by design, right, is very appealing.
I think what'll be interesting too, like indirectly, the use of AI for the fixing side of things should light a fire under the testing side. And I'm not talking about the security testing side. I'm talking about like the QA, QE testing side of regression testing. Highlight the importance of that, because that's where the slowdown occurs. If I want to have AI go in and say, hey, look, go auto fix these cross-site scripting flaws or this other stuff, great. Like, it'll go in and update the code. The slowdown is, when that goes to QA and we regression test it, that's a manual process, and we have to spend all this time to validate that you didn't break something that was working. And, with good regression testing and all that stuff, it's a lot easier for your AI to sit there and say, okay, make the change, run it through regression testing. Oh, it broke this. Wait, we'll fix that, right? And it just gets caught in that loop and does it. But if you don't have good regression testing, you lose that. And now the confidence of being able to say, okay, I'll let AI update this for me kind of goes down a little bit, because now you're sitting there biting your fingernails thinking, what's going to break when I push this to production?
Yeah, I'm really excited. AI is making strides not only in security, but in regression testing. I think it's an important aspect because, we're going to have to speed up the slowest part of our SDLC. And if now it's regression testing and making sure that the app still works, it makes sense that, the industry as a whole will spend more time making this whole process faster.
Yeah. I think what'll be interesting too in that is, what does it do for pen testers and some of these other things that we needed to be able to find some of these logic flaws, like some of these different things that some of the AI is able to see by looking at the code and drawing context, that if I as a AppSec organization can implement that internally before I get out to the pen testers externally, what's left for them to find if we're able to reproduce a lot of what they're able to find. Because if we got AI pointed at our code, it sees way more than a typical pen tester sees from just the outside. How does that affect that bug bounties, some of those other things, if the defenders start getting these tools in their own hands to be able to run them?
Yeah, it's a good question. My impression is that AI pen testers are probably like a senior level pen tester, not a principal pen tester. So there is still something that humans can do. The beauty of AI is that it runs anytime, every time, right? And so maybe it will eliminate 95% of the bugs, but you'll still need really good principal level pen testers to do that last 5%. I don't know if that's going to change, but That's anyone's guess.
I can't help but think of the line, 60% of the time, it works 100% of the time. All right. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap, but I do have one more question for you. And I just want your honest answer here. Looking, I don't know, as far as we can look in this industry, let's say 3 years, do we end up with nearly or very nearly bug-free code as AI gets introduced more into the development, the testing, the security testing, the pen testing, the analysis, like all of that?
I sure hope so. I think I think the bar will be raised where our expectations for our software will do so many more things, so many more features. And it will be essentially an arms race between attackers and defenders. So while it can do a lot of things, our expectations will also be raised. So
yeah,
it just seems like it will be like playing catch up.
I mean, so it just sounds like your answer is very similar to what I've heard from others. It's like, well, everything is going to have to the bar is going to raise all the way around. And because attackers will also be using AI and we'll be using AI, it's basically the same as today with just more tech. It's like, okay.
More tokens, more spend.
More tokens.
More tokens.
There you go. More tokens, more money spent. All right, Paulo, awesome having you on board, man. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, folks. James, Jim, always good having you aboard. Interesting conversation. Do you guys think we're going to get to zero vault at some point?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Me neither.
No.
I just think we'll find bigger and better ways to create more problems.
Well, I think, do we run into a situation where just like the vehicles, right? Like self-driving vehicles, at what point does the AI start sitting there saying, well, the best decision I think is do this, right?
Yeah.
I told you not to do SQL injection, but the only way I can make this work is SQL injection. So my job is to make it work. Boom, I'm going to put it inline SQL, right? Like
that's
self-driving car. Do I protect the one guy in the car or the 50 people you're about to run into?
I
don't know. It changes the perspective of at what point does it start making decisions kind of on its own and say, oh, out of these two, this is the route I'm going.
That will be. We need to do that for another podcast. If you're listening and you have opinions on this, hit me up on LinkedIn. I think this would be a fun conversation. Once again, Paulo, thanks for joining us, sir. Appreciate you sharing the knowledge and wisdom you've gained, and thanks to the Motley Fool for given us the time with you. And folks, thanks for listening. We'll catch you another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph signing off. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.